Sustainability Manager at Itaú Unibanco, and I'm flattered to be here today at the opening of the last chapter of our Green Economic Recovery Seminar for countries and the global community. I'd like to welcome everyone who follows us online today. This project was developed from an understanding of the need to discuss and learn from the international experience of the green economic recovery and Brazil facing the challenge of climate change. It was organized by Instituto Democracia e Sustentabilidade, BEI, Arq.Futuro, and Insper, with the support of Itaú Unibanco. The idea of the seminar took place after a debate with the then Environmental and Climate Action Minister of Portugal, João Pedro Matos Fernandes. At that time, Portugal was the first country in the world to establish a program to decarbonize its economy with goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in 50% by 2030, achieving a net zero economy until 2050, aligned with Paris Agreement. It's important to point out that we have been experiencing the effects of climate change on our daily lives and businesses. The frequency and intensity of extreme weather events has increased in recent years since the pre-industrial eras. We have been impacted by heat and cold waves, heavy and concentrated rains, prolonged droughts above the historical records, constant increased temperatures, and other climate events. These phenomena have also caught attention of the global financial system. At Itaú, it's not different. As the biggest bank in Latin America, we recognize our climate responsibility. In 2021, Itaú joined the Net Zero Bank Alliance and also established goals for the decarbonization of business with the objective to being net zero bank carbon in 2050. We understand the relevance of the topic, both in terms of risk management and fiduciary duty, and also in terms of opportunities for a new and vibrant economy, especially in Brazil, which has immense biodiversity, a huge environmental potential that opens up a window of opportunity for the country's sustainable development with social inclusion and nature-based solutions. Combined with post-COVID-19 crisis, this is the scenario in which the seminar takes place. We have already heard the experiences of Chile, China, and France. These previous sessions were recorded and are available on the digital platform. Today, we are going to learn from the experience of the United States of America on energy sector and energy transition for carbon neutrality. Like the US, Brazil is one of the largest democracies in the world, one of the largest countries in terms of territorial size, population, cultural diversity, GDP, and have many challenges to face towards a net zero carbon economy, as every country in the world. It is with great joy that I turn the floor to Professor Priscila Claro Borim, who leads the Sustainability and Business Research Center at INSPER and will mediate this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. As Fabio just mentioned, I am an associate professor here in INSPER. INSPER is a private, not-for-profit business school, and I also lead the Sustainability and Business Study Center here. So this is a very, I would say, important moment for us here, because some of our projects right now has to do with sustainability-oriented innovations, especially thinking about how small and medium organizations in Brazil can be brought to the discussion and also to the innovation ecosystem that is needed for the Agenda 2030 to become reality. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to facilitate the discussion. And I'm really glad that we have the United States case. It's really a good, excellent, I would say, benchmark for us. And beforehand, I would like to thank Julie Cerqueira for being here with us. Julie is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the United States Department of Energy's Office of International Affairs. Julie also served as Executive Director of the U.S. Climate Alliance, a bipartisan coalition of governors focused on the climate agenda, and also as a Senior Advisor to the U.S. Department of State Special Envoy for Climate, where she served on the efforts of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. She also launched the Brazil Climate Innovation Lab to mobilize climate investment overseas. So thank you, Julie, again for taking part in this seminar. It's going to be a pleasure, not only to know what you are going to present, but also to discuss that afterwards. The dynamic of the seminar will be as follows. We will have 1 hour, and we will start with Julie's presentation. After that, we will be discussing and commenting the presentation. And if you that are with us today following the seminar wants to make questions or also comments, please feel free to send everything that you want to say or to discuss using the YouTube chat. We also have here today João Capobianco, the Vice-President of Instituto Democracia, IDS. João will be here also with us to discuss the seminar at the end of this presentation. Julie, thank you again. The microphone is yours.
Priscilla, Fabio, thank you so much for that introduction, and bom dia to everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you, and I just want to thank IDS in particular for really inviting the Department of Energy to participate in this important series of seminars. As you can see, we are loading the slide deck, and so we're going to spend about 20 minutes talking about the U.S. experience in promoting a sustainable and more equitable economic recovery, especially as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So thanks for bearing with us. We have a lot of information in the slides for you. So on to the next slide. First, I'd like to start off showcasing our bilateral cooperation with Brazil on clean energy. Brazil is one of our most important partners in the region, and so we work very closely with them. Just 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, hosted Adolfo Saxida, which is Brazil's Minister of Mines and Energy, as you know.
Recording in progress.
For the second ministerial meeting under the U.S.-Brazil Energy Forum, or USBEF, as we call it. The USBEF is the main bilateral framework for energy cooperation between the United States and Brazil. Secretary Granholm and Minister Saxida endorsed a joint action plan containing activities under 3 areas of cooperation. The first is carbon and methane management. The second is civil nuclear power, and the third is energy efficiency, renewables, and grid modernization. So as you can see, a very expansive portfolio of cooperation for these 2 countries. The new action plan reinforces our country's commitment to cooperate on clean energy, including renewables, energy efficiency, energy storage, and energy efficiency technologies. In the afternoon, Secretary Granholm launched the U.S.-Brazil Clean Energy Industry Dialogue. This is a public and private clean energy cooperation that's led by both U.S. and Brazilian companies to promote trade and investment in 5 priority areas. Those areas include offshore wind, clean hydrogen, carbon and methane management, sustainable fuels, and grid modernization and storage. We had 80 participants in the room, another 80 that were dialing in remote, and had a live broadcast of the meeting. The meeting was hosted by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C. It was just an amazing example of collaboration between our governments and the private sector, so it was a terrific kickoff. Following that meeting, we're already starting to organize some of the bilateral working groups that are co-led by the private sector, both in the U.S. and Brazil. There were a lot of other U.S. government agencies that participated in the whole day of bilateral meetings and are actively participating in these bilateral discussions. Our secretary places a very high priority on advancing the dialogue with partners like Brazil. And of note, we probably had more agency colleagues in that meeting than any other bilat in my experience. And so it just really helps to underscore the priority that we place on Brazil as a partner. So both of our countries truly are energy powerhouses with enormous clean energy and sustainable resources. We're both large producers of renewable power, including wind, solar, and hydropower. We're the largest producers of biofuels in the world, Both of our countries are producing more from every renewable source, including from our rich endowment of biomass resources. And by being leaders in oil and natural gas in our respective regions, it also provides us the platform to develop and adopt the technologies and the best practices to mitigate the methane and carbon emissions in our oil and gas supply chains to ensure that these fuel sources are as clean as possible. Brazil and the United States also cooperate in multiple multilateral fora, such as the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation. In fact, this year, the United States will host a major multilateral forum in just 3 weeks. It's called the Global Clean Energy Action Forum, and it'll take place this month from September 21st to September 23rd in Pittsburgh. The registration closes on September 9th. It is free, it's open to everyone, and so if any of you are thinking of coming to the UN General Assembly or to Climate Week in New York and want to stop by Pittsburgh for this meeting, please do register online. It's www.gceaf.org, so we can circulate that information around. But we would love to have you there. There's going to be thousands of clean energy leaders, including around 18 ministers and 250 CEOs that are there to collaborate on clean energy. This event comes at a pivotal time as we continue to build a new energy economy that benefits all, improves energy security, tackles climate change, and reaps the rewards of a massive clean energy market. I hope some of you here today, including representatives from industry and universities, citizen organizations, and researchers, will participate, joining a list of over 3,000 participants who've already registered in Pittsburgh later this month. Next slide. As you know, President Biden has bold plans to transition our economy to clean energy and put the U.S. on an irreversible path to overcoming the climate crisis. This requires us to reduce carbon emissions by 50 to 52% by the end of the decade, produce 100% clean energy by 2035, and hit net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The president charged our department, the Department of Energy, with speeding the development of critical technologies in a suite of innovation areas. DOE is leveraging that expertise and talent at American universities and businesses, national laboratories, to accelerate research and development in these top technologies, such as hydrogen or carbon capture, industrial fuels, and energy storage. Last year, we launched a series of what we call the Energy Earthshots to help us pursue President Biden's energy and climate goals. The Energy Earthshots are an all-hands-on-deck call for innovation, collaboration, and acceleration of our clean energy economy. And it tackles the toughest technology barriers to quickly demonstrate and deploy emerging clean energy technologies at scale. Let me talk about some of them, which I believe are at the center of the energy transition strategy in the US and also in Brazil. I understand Brazil is one of the global leaders in wind and energy and has enormous potential to deploy large amounts of power from onshore and offshore wind. Wind today provides about 9% of our electricity in the United States, but meeting our climate goals is going to require at least a 5-fold increase in wind power generation. That's huge. Last year, we announced a goal to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, a goal that has kickstarted the sector in creating tens of thousands of good-paying jobs. Ongoing technology advances will allow us to produce wind turbines more cost-effectively and capture more wind for energy. And we're supporting research to develop taller turbine towers, to improve manufacturing, and to reduce costs. As for Brazil, solar is a growing energy sector here and in the US. Solar provides about 3% of our electricity here in the United States, so it's still relatively small. We need to deploy solar 5 times faster than it is now to meet the 2035 decarbonization goals that our president has set. And we need to cut the cost of solar electricity by more than half by 2031. And that's significant when you consider how quickly the cost of solar has already declined over the last decade. DOE is setting a new goal of driving down the cost of 4.6 cents per kilowatt hour to 3 cents per kilowatt hour by 2025 and 2 cents per kilowatt hour by 2030. That is a major cut, and that would be huge for American families and for households. It would make solar the lowest cost source of electricity generation in the country. In order to transition to a carbon-free electricity sector, we will need to continue to make major strides to integrate more renewable energy generation onto the grid while ensuring it is reliable, secure, and resilient as it evolves. I understand Brazil is also trying to address this challenge as the country continues to generate large amounts of wind and solar power that needs to be integrated into the grid. Storage and other technologies can help the US and Brazil address this very critical challenge. So one of our Energy Earth shots is called the Long Duration Storage Shot. It was also launched last year, and it aims to cut long duration, which means 10 plus hours of energy storage costs by a whopping 90% from 2020 lithium-ion battery baseline within just this decade. Hydrogen will also play a big role in the energy transition in the US and around the world. And I understand that Brazil has also an ambitious hydrogen program. As you know, hydrogen is a versatile energy carrier that offers a path to a clean and sustainable energy future, from power to fuels and a lot of hard-to-abate sectors. Hydrogen can add value to multiple sectors in the economy and support America's manufacturing. It serves as a sustainable and zero or low transportation input to produce electricity and heat for homes. It also serves as energy storage, allowing higher penetration of renewables and providing ancillary benefits to the grid. It could also be exported to markets that are looking for carbon-free technology and energy. Realizing that true potential for hydrogen requires commitment to research and development, as well as ramping up demonstrations and deployments with the private sector to achieve scale. Unlike traditional fuels, hydrogen will involve a greater integration of renewable, fossil, and nuclear energy systems, and it will take an integrated approach from all energy sectors to realize the full potential and benefits of hydrogen. One of DOE's flagship initiatives is the Hydrogen at Scale, which works to enable large-scale, affordable hydrogen production, storage, and utilization across different sectors of the economy. H2 at Scale initiative is integrating different sectors such as steel manufacturing, data centers and ports, as well as medium and heavy-duty trucks. The Hydrogen Energy Earthshot seeks to reduce the cost of clean hydrogen by 80%, to $1 per 1 kilo in 1 decade. That's a 111 in case you want to remember it. Currently, hydrogen from renewable energy costs about $5 per kilogram. So as you can see, we've got a long ways to go, but we're investing very heavily in this research. By achieving the program's 80% cost reduction goal, we can unlock 5-fold increase in demand by increasing clean hydrogen production from pathways such as renewables, nuclear, and also thermal conversion. We can also unlock new markets for hydrogen, including the shipping industry, steel manufacturing, clean ammonia, energy storage, and heavy-duty trucks. Clean hydrogen is a potential area of cooperation between the US and Brazil, including with the participation of the private sector and industry from both of our countries. DOE is committed to the development of clean hydrogen, not only in the US, but in our own region, in the Western Hemisphere. I think that we truly can be leaders globally if we can invest in the market in the Western Hemisphere. So this October, the Secretary will host governments, industry, academics, and representatives from civil society at the Hydrogen Americas Summit in Washington, D.C. to discuss the opportunities of clean hydrogen in our region. I'd be happy to share additional information about the event for any of those that are interested in attending. We're also working hard to develop and deploy sustainable and competitive sustainable fuels, such as advanced biofuels and sustainable aviation fuels. DOE is funding high-impact technology research, development, demonstration, deployment to accelerate the bioeconomy, especially the production of low-carbon fuels for the aviation industry. By reducing the cost and technical risk, DOE can help pave the way for the development of commercial-scale integrated biorefineries and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from sectors that are very difficult to decarbonize, such as aviation. In September of 2021, so last year, the White House launched the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge, a collaborative effort between the Departments of Energy, Transportation, and Agriculture to reduce the cost, enhance the sustainability, and expand the production and use of sustainable aviation fuels. Finally, we're developing competitive technologies to reduce the carbon and methane footprint from our large oil and natural gas sectors. Carbon capture and storage, or CCS, provides a near-term pathway to reduce point source carbon emissions from power plants and industrial sectors, while zero carbon alternative solutions still mature. DOE is investing in research, development, demonstration, and deployment approaches to advance technologies in CCS and other carbon management options. Reducing methane emissions from the oil and gas sector is also a critical issue for the Biden administration and for DOE. Addressing methane that is released during flaring, venting, and infrastructure leaks throughout the natural gas supply chain needs to be front and center for industry and governments around the world. We're envisioning this area of cooperation in our bilateral activities with Brazil. And so in addition to the energy earthshots, DOE is working hard to implement the programs approved by recent legislative actions in the US that I'm very excited to share with you. This is hot off the press. So for this next slide, for almost 2 years, the Biden-Harris administration has been working with Congress to negotiate the approval of legislation, which means that's binding, giving the necessary authority and resources for DOE and other appropriate agencies to develop and implement programs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve the energy infrastructure of our nation, including programs that would ensure energy access to low-income populations. Last year, President Biden signed into law the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which provides over $62 billion to DOE. The infrastructure law invests more than $7 billion in the supply chain of batteries. It provides additional $1.5 billion for clean hydrogen manufacturing and research and development and demonstration on recycling. It also expands the authority of DOE's Loan Program Office to invest in projects that increase the domestic supply of critical minerals and invest in manufacturing zero carbon technologies for medium and heavy duty vehicles, trains, aircraft, and marine transportation. In addition, the law invests millions of dollars in workforce development to prepare Americans to work in the clean energy sector. It invests $14 billion in grants to support resilience of the electric infrastructure transmission and to expand investment in a smart grid. It allocates $6 billion for the maintenance of legacy nuclear power plants. And finally, it provides $21 billion in funding for clean energy demonstration and research hubs for clean hydrogen, carbon capture, direct air capture, and industrial emission reductions. This is a huge investment. And then recently, onto the next slide, President Biden signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act with several provisions that will help the U.S. address the challenges from climate change. So the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, as we call it, is a $369 billion investment in the modernization of the American energy system. This law is the most significant legislation in U.S. history to cut pollution, to advance environmental justice, and to improve American energy security. It's going to lower energy costs, saving families $500 per year on their energy bills. And the IRA includes many tax provisions that will impact the electricity, transportation, building envelope, equipment to enhancing energy efficiency, clean fuels, carbon capture manufacturing, the clean energy supply chain, all while creating good paying jobs across the country. It is a huge investment in the future of the United States and in our infrastructure. The combined efforts from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and IRA may reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 from a 2005 baseline. In addition to greenhouse gas emission reductions, these measures would lower energy costs for consumers, enhance energy security, and improve human health. Also, by stimulating domestic manufacturing, these laws are intended to create millions of jobs in the US and increase energy access to the poorest communities in our country. An important question relates to how these laws will drive emissions down in the coming years and decades. So, for example, in the power sector, the new extended tax incentives will increase power generation, including wind and solar. New tax incentives for energy storage will ensure reliable dispatch of these resources to the electric grid. The new civil nuclear credit program will support a required maintenance of our existing nuclear power fleet, which will be essential to the US hitting its energy goals. And funding for loans, research and development, for demonstration, will support innovation and new deployments. If I turn to the transportation sector, the clean vehicle tax credit under the IRA will support the transition to clean transportation and promote the expansion of the supply chain for critical materials and also for battery production. The law will also increase access to clean vehicles, providing tax credits for low-income Americans who purchase used clean vehicles. And that's going to be huge for them to be able to tap into a secondary market, which isn't very robust today. It also creates tax credits for the use of clean fuels like biodiesel, renewable diesel, advanced biofuels, and sustainable aviation fuels. These efforts will be complemented by other provisions under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to deploy necessary charging infrastructure, including in low and moderate income and rural communities. Next slide. In the building sector, the two laws provide tax incentives and rebates for energy efficiency in homes and in commercial buildings. It also provides funding for the adoption of building codes at the state and local level. Many of the provisions support the electrification of buildings with low carbon equipment such as heat pumps for heating, air conditioning, and hot water. In addition, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Fund funds weatherization programs for the poor. The two laws combined will also be driving down emissions in the industrial sector by providing incentives for the use of clean fuels, procurement measures for the use of low carbon materials in industrial facilities. The IRA provides financial assistance for industrial facilities to use advanced industrial technologies, such as electrification, low carbon fuels, and carbon capture, reducing emissions in energy-intensive sectors like iron, steel, cement, and chemicals. Finally, in addition to the climate benefits, the two laws combined will help modernize our energy system, lower energy costs for consumers, enhance energy security, and improve public health. DOE is already working hard to implement the measures established by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and is getting ready to implement the additional measures envisioned by the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act. DOE will continue to announce progress about the implementation of these laws on our website at energy.gov. Thank you so much. I look forward to answering your questions. I know that was a lot of information to digest, but I'm just so proud of the work that this administration is doing under the leadership of our secretary. So thank you again.
Thank you, Julie. It was really clarifying, and I think a lot of information that probably most of us will have to look for it afterwards because they're very interesting. Thank you again. Well, I will start with a question because as I am facilitating it today, I'm going to use my right. I just wonder, and I wanted to listen or hear from you about what are the roles, specific roles of the private sector in this kind of partnerships, and how do you integrate the private partners in this discussion and in this implementation? Because we know this must be governed somehow. You need to have a governance or good governance to integrate private companies. What are your experience, and if you would suggest something for us in Brazil to get more private companies within this project and in order to achieve what we need in terms of emissions, what are the good examples of partnerships?
Now, that's a great question. And there's no way that we can do this without the private sector, right? The work that the government is doing is to stimulate private sector investment by making sure that we're taking the risks of bringing in that capital into the country. And so one of the examples is we have a loan program office that is the one that is investing in these first or second generation clean energy technologies. And the reason that this program office is so important is because for many of these technologies and the companies that are investing in them, those investments are too risky for them to be able to secure loans from the private sector banks at rates that make those projects affordable. So our program office is important because they help to actually offer those loans at a low enough risk, or a low enough cost to be able to take on some of that risk for those companies. And those companies have to do their own cost sharing, and they have to be able to leverage that to get private sector investment from other banks into those projects. And that's important because it means that we're not crowding out private sector investment. We're taking on just enough risk that it's actually attracting private financing into these projects that otherwise would never be able to get off the ground. And then by making those investments, they're starting to prove those technologies, working with partners in other countries, working with partners in country in the United States, and then starting to demonstrate the potential for these technologies and to bring the costs down, which then over time is allowing us to build this new market and to actually get broader deployment of the technologies. So many of the programs that we have are structured in this way, but I think the Loan Program Office in particular, which has received billions of dollars from these programs to make these investments, is one of the best examples for how we can actually do this and how we can do it effectively.
Thank you. Very good. I'll invite my colleagues here if they want to join us in the discussion. João is here with us and Fabio as well.
Hi, Julie. Your presentation was impressive. In the
sense of financing, maybe later on, Fabio. Sorry.
Hi, Julie.
Go ahead, João.
Your presentation was impressive. Practically all the questions that we had prepared were already answered through your presentation.
See, we can end early. We did it. We answered everything.
That was incredible. Thank you very much. But I'd like to answer to listen about one specific question about the participation of civil society in the process of formulation and approving the two recent approved laws. How important was this participation?
We rely so heavily on civil society in the U.S. to help advance these laws. And I will say before coming back to the federal government, I myself was working with, a coalition of governors, working with civil society. And at the end of the day, the president can only propose a budget to Congress. We need Congress to approve those funds for us to be able to deploy. We need, as part of IRA, for example, for Congress to change the authorities for how we can actually invest some of these resources. And I will say that much to the credit of civil society, it's through their advocacy and their engagement that they're able to oftentimes influence the folks who are the decision makers in Congress to make sure that we have those resources. I think especially when it comes to communities who are impacted by these rules, having community-based organizations that are helping Congress and also DOE and others understand how those communities can benefit, what types of projects are going to be best for them, how have we in the past actually disenfranchised them in a way that we need to correct as we move forward. So civil society plays a critical role, even in just formulating and then getting support for the passage of these bills. And then once those bills are already passed, they're going to play an essential role in not just helping us think about how do we actually deploy these funds. So for example, we have a Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations that is mobilizing $21.5 billion for demonstration projects. What they started to do is staff up is the first thing. We're creating a new office. So civil society, help us find the best talent to get into this office to help shape these projects. 2 is conducting very thorough stakeholder engagement to make sure that the program is set up in a way that is equitable and really investing in communities and the right types of projects. And then even when the money is out the door, we rely on civil society to be partners for us, again, to make sure that the way that the United States is investing its resources is something that benefits not just the private sector, but it benefits communities all over this country, that there's a job creation component to it, that we're especially investing in communities that have historically been disenfranchised. So civil society is absolutely at the center of everything, from the beginning of how we think about our policies to the way that we are investing in these communities and projects.
Thank you very much.
If I may jump in, Julie, as we are talking about participation in this process, how do you see the participation of private financial sector in enabling investment or scaling or deployment of these green energy technologies, and if it's necessary to thinking on different financial models or different products to attend the green energy?
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, kind of similar to the question that Priscilla had asked, you know, the private sector financing has to be part of this, right? So public sector financing can only provide a tiny fraction of the actual investment that is needed to get these technologies to scale. And so the only way for us to bring down the costs of these technologies, the research and development that we're investing in is really important, but for those to then be commercially viable and out in the market requires huge scales, several factors more than what we as a government can put in. Even with $369 billion, that's still a small fraction of what actually needs to be invested in. And then in terms of the different financial mechanisms, you know, I'm not a financing expert, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think in particular, where we're on the precipice of innovation in particular, that's where we need new financial models, because the risk is just too high for many banks to come in, again, which is why we're stepping in to try to catalyze that. But I think looking for models, especially on the innovation side, is going to be important. And then in particular, how do you also have financial mechanisms that are appropriate for emerging economies and developing countries where it's much harder to get those financial investments, and where governments like the US and others can't invest as heavily as they can within their own borders. And so I think that's especially where the innovation on the financing side has to happen, is especially when you're looking at markets outside of like the United States and Europe, et cetera.
Yeah, that was great, Fabio, because I was going to ask you about that part of finance, the private financing. And as you work for Itaú, probably you've been discussing that as well. So it's good that we kind of connect here. And I just want to make a point that you were talking about several sectors that are really important in terms of emissions for the US. In Brazil, one of our main drivers for emissions is the agribusiness. And agriculture, land change, and deforestation. So how do you integrate? I know that that's not that important for you in terms of emission, but how do you deal with the agribusiness sector that is also important for the US in terms of especially carbon dioxide and methane? How do you...
So, oh gosh, it's like such a difficult question. And first, you know, for DOE, the agribusiness side is not where we're investing very heavily. You'll see, for example, with sustainable aviation fuels, right, that we are doing some biofuels work, including with Brazil. So there is that component to it. And I do think that the agricultural sector can be a major contributor to the solution set, especially as we're thinking about biomass and biofuels. The agribusiness sector is especially challenging, though, because, you know, at its core is sort of this vision of it being, you know, in the United States and probably in Brazil as well, smallhold farmers, farming families, right? And so the politics around how you tackle agricultural emissions is very different from what it is in the industrial sector. And it's especially because when you're looking at clean energy, a lot of the investments that you're making have very clear like rates of return on those investments. And so the business model for it is also different. So you have a different business model, and then the politics around it is also very different. I will say, not in my current role, but when I used to work at the State Department, we did a lot of work actually with agriculture and forestry. And I think the key thing is, you know, again, because the business model is different and the politics around it are so different, you really have to focus on how you can raise farm incomes while reducing emissions. And so it's less about the getting to net zero emissions or just totally reducing the emissions across the sector. And I think the focus that we had at the time was on enhanced productivity. So how do you bring down the carbon intensity of beef by investing in feedstocks, right? Or the way that, meat is processed. And so you look more at the carbon intensity, and you also have to think very closely around farm incomes and those investments, especially in forestry. It's the same thing, right? If we can't find ways of making the protection of these areas something that's worth investing in because there's monetary value, it's very hard to do. It's hard to justify, especially when people in these communities feel like they're already living on the edge and relying on that for their own survival, right? So I think that that's sort of the balance. And again, not my area of expertise because we're the Department of Energy, but just from my personal experience.
No, I completely agree with you. And before
I'm talking about
continue this discussion, I think I agree. Yeah, just a minute, Capo. I agree with you that the small farmers are really important to get into this. And I think in Brazil, we've seen a very nice pattern of integrating supply chain members and talking to industry, because most of the industry guys here, they have to have the net zero done. And in that sense, they would have to work with their suppliers. And for the beverages and food industry, this has to do with agribusiness. So I agree with you, and it's really good to hear that from you. Capo, sorry. I get really happy to talk about those issues.
Nice, very nice. No, it's okay. It's very good. Now, I'd like to talk about the deforestation in Brazil. You know that it accounts for almost half of our emissions. Was this matter discussed in the meeting with our Minister of Energy that you mentioned in your presentation? And do you have any news about the proposal from President Biden to create a fund to support investments in deforestation reduction in Brazil?
And João Paulo, I missed the beginning. Did you say deforestation?
Accounts for about half of our emissions. And I'd like to know if this question was mentioned in your meeting with our Minister of Energy.
So it was not, mostly because our department does not work on any deforestation issues. So we really focused much more on the technology side, how we can collaborate on investment and policy, but primarily in the energy sector.
Okay, and do you have any information about this fund proposal by President Biden to support the reduction of deforestation in Amazon? Do you have any information about that?
I don't, unfortunately, only because we don't cover forestation, but I do know that, again, we work very closely with our State Department colleagues on the Brazil partnership. And I will say that aside from energy, addressing the deforestation issue is our #1 priority in many ways with Brazil. So I know that there's a lot of people who are really thinking about how to help Brazil solve sort of this challenge.
Okay. Fabio?
Julie, I would like to come back to the 5 priorities you mentioned in energy. And I'd like to know, how do you see the participation of especially ethanol as part of the solution to decarbonize the energy sector? Here in Brazil, we see ethanol as part of our solution. Our matrix here, it's really dependent on ethanol, and we believe that this will increase. And I'd like to know how U.S. are facing ethanol inside the biofuels that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, ethanol is certainly one of the fuels that we consider, and biofuels in particular are going to be important for things like sustainable aviation fuels. So it's certainly something that we're collaborating with Brazil on. I think one thing to just always keep in mind is that we need to make sure that we're considering the life cycle analysis for those biofuels. So I think to your point on deforestation, we just need to make sure that by investing in biofuels, we're not on the other end propagating more deforestation because of the land use issues associated with it. So, something that is part of the solution set, but that we really need to think about, pretty closely to just make sure that we're understanding what the impacts are on the production side as well.
Great, thank you. And if I can continue with one more question here regarding the 5 priorities. How do you see the carbon capture and storage as a reality? Here we are in Brazil, we are seeing this reality, especially when you look at oil and gas sector. But how is the future of this new technology and the capital needs for the deployment of this kind of technology? And could you exemplify how is the storage in US, the process, and where people or companies are stocking carbon there, please?
Well, CCS is a big priority for us, just because, when you look at the IPCC report, right, it's very clear that under all the scenarios that are left for us to achieve our 2050 goals, we need to be able to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. There's no way of doing it anymore without that being part of it. So there's 2 different things that we're looking at. One is CCS, which is more of your standard power plants and trying to capture emissions from them, looking at injection or storage. And so that's going to be particularly important, especially as both of our countries continue to be oil and gas producers, making that as clean as possible. CCS is also going to be especially important for the industrial sector, which is still fairly carbon intensive. So we see that as part of the solution set for how we're going to help decarbonize industry. In addition to that, though, we're also thinking about carbon removal. And so carbon negative technologies that are actually just taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting that somewhere. So not related to specific point source technologies. For that, there's a couple of things that we're doing. So I had talked a little bit about the energy earth shots, primarily for hydrogen and long duration storage. We actually have a third energy earth shot that's called carbon negative shot. And the intention there is to advance the technologies for carbon dioxide removal to a point where they're pretty cost effective. And I believe we're looking at trying to get the price down to $100 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent by the end of the decade. In addition to that, we're working with partner countries through mission innovation, and it's a mission called the Carbon Dioxide Removal Mission. And the intention there is to then, leverage some of this research that we're doing in the US to work with partner countries to advance technologies globally on carbon capture. And for that, I believe the goal is for us to collectively be able to remove 100 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year by 2030. So that's the global goal that we're all working towards. So we are looking at both of those technologies that, sort of do the same thing in terms of like pulling CO2 out of processes or out of the air, but have very different technological pathways. And of course, for the latter one, for the carbon dioxide removal technologies, those are more early stage and something that requires significantly more investment for us to actually really bring down the cost of those technologies.
Well, we've got some questions from the public, and I think for some of them you already answered. I think there is one that maybe you could explore a bit. It's about what are the main barriers regarding this kind of innovation and public and private partnership. Are there any impediments or parties that are not willing to participate or are trying to avoid? How do you feel that?
Sorry, Priscilla, I didn't understand the question. Do you mind repeating it one more time?
No problem. The question that comes from the public is related to, are there any parties trying to create any barrier for the leverage of this agenda or of this plans that you have to achieve those goals?
If I can complement, the idea is that's about the society in general.
Yeah.
Has society become more welcoming of climate action measure? Because, how is it about the deniers of the climate change in the States?
Yeah, and so these are great questions. I'm trying to figure out how can I answer this without getting in trouble. So, so yes, there are still parties who, you know, because they benefit by not advancing clean energy technologies, that are sort of putting up obstacles. You know, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was a bipartisan bill. The IRA, which is $369 billion, is not a bipartisan legislation. It really was actually like Democrats who made that happen and who really wanted to see a major investment in our communities in particular. And so I think that we're still working through things as a country. I will say that there's just been such a substantial change across the population, and especially in the private sector, in terms of placing value on climate change as a priority. And I think that's driven by a number of things. First, just the sheer volume of severe weather events that we as the United States are facing in communities that oftentimes are not major climate leaders, right? We're just seeing wildfires that we've never seen at a scale before, droughts, flooding. So our people are facing these acute crises that are directly related to climate change, right? So I think, unfortunately, because things continue to exacerbate, that's really become front and center. Second, I think what we've seen in the United States and around the world is just how powerful the youth voice has been. So we just have a whole generation of kids, teenagers, who are just really concerned about their future and the world that they're like growing into, right? And so they've just been such a powerful voice in putting pressure on politicians and businesses, on their own schools and communities, on educating their parents as to why this needs to be a priority. And then the third thing is that many of the investments we're making are intended specifically to benefit communities, right? So we're talking about like putting rooftop solar on people's homes at almost no cost so that they have low cost clean power, of creating secondary markets for electric vehicles that are low cost, but the loan you have to take out front in order to buy the vehicle can sometimes be challenging for the poor. So creating a secondary market with tax incentives so that everybody has access to these vehicles. So I think because where the laws are designed in a way that is investing in people and not just in like technologies, and really showing people that, look, this is the future. We can either get left behind, or we can embrace the future that we all want, which are technological solutions that help people, that are efficiency measures that put money back in the pocket of American families, that create good quality jobs, many jobs that are union jobs that have protections and benefits to people, and that we're specifically investing even in like rural communities that often don't benefit from some of these policies. So I think just making people the center of the clean energy transition is the way that we're going to continue to inspire people to not only be like afraid of the climate impacts, but also to embrace the fact that there's so many benefits to us actually moving forward together rather than fighting. And let's discuss what the solution set is that makes sense for folks. But I think we're at a point in time where we need to stop pretending that climate change isn't real or man-made, and instead embrace the fact that it's here. But we can figure out the solution, but we have to do that together. And so I think that is slowly changing in the United States. And these types of investments are the things that are really going to change public opinion in a way that I think that hasn't been effective probably in the last 10 or 20 years.
Perfect, Julie. Thank you. I think it was a very nice discussion to end our seminar today, because in a way or another, it must be inclusive. And to be inclusive, people need to know why they are important and how it's going to affect their life. So thank you again. I will ask João to close this seminar, because we know that you also have another meeting. Thank you again, Fabio, Julie, and João Paulo. It was amazing to discuss these topics with you here today.
Julie, thank you very much. On behalf of the organizers of this event, I'd like to thank you for excellent presentation and your willingness to debate with us. The recent initiatives approved and being implemented in the States are extremely important and will certainly help to inspire other countries, including Brazil, to increase their ambitions in emissions reduction actions, enable the construction of alternatives to reduce the risk of the climate disaster that threatens humanity. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to discuss with you. You gave us a lot of information, and it will be very helpful to us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.